Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mom Please, the discussion and debate show that spans generations and attempts to make some sense of everything that's going on in modern society. I'm your host, Eric Joseph, representing the millennial viewpoint, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, representing the baby boomer perspective, Carol Stram.
Hi, as you also know, I'm Eric's mother. He's my son.
How are you doing today, Mom?
I'm doing great. You?
Great. So we are continuing our conversation today about political correctness and cultural appropriation. We didn't quite completely get finished with everything that we wanted to get through last time, I think. So instead of moving straight into cultural appropriation today, I think what we're going to do first is kind of wrap up our thoughts on political correctness. And then once we've done that, we'll go ahead and we'll go and talk about cultural appropriation.
Sure.
How's that sound?
Sure, that's great. One of the discussions that we had was about comedians being unable to really, use all of their wares and all their arsenal because there's so much pressure on them to be politically correct.
Right.
And that so many of them are kind of dialing back a little bit on what they're doing. And recently there was a post by
Jerry Seinfeld, right? Yeah.
Who was very angry about this. He said that the liberals and political correctness is essentially ruining
comedy. Yeah.
And he's not the most.
He's not pushing a lot of boundaries. That's the funny thing.
He doesn't push a lot of boundaries.
Yeah, he's not quite.
But I think he's thinking that some of his colleagues are, really having more difficult times.
Yeah, that is interesting. Did
you have any more political correctness stuff you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think we talked quite a lot about it, and I think one of the points that I wanted to make was we discussed kind of our own personal feelings about it.
Right.
Why we might personally feel it's not that great or not super useful, I guess I could say. But what I wanted to point out, because people might say to that, well, what's the problem with that? If it's not that great or not super useful, that doesn't sound horrible. That's not bad, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it can actually be bad. And one of the things I want to highlight is my wife and I recently watched All Quiet on the Set, which was a documentary about the Nickelodeon Sunrise studio and the early 2000s, mm-hmm. I want to say, basically around the time that they were doing shows like All That, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to speak specifically to the Drake and Josh show. So one of the actors on the show, Drake Bell, mm-hmm. came out in this documentary, and he essentially said that he had been sexually assaulted by Brian Peck, one of the dialogue coaches mm-hmm. on the show, in the the working in the back. And this had gone on over the course of his show. This had gone on for a while, and he had only just come up about it. He'd only just come out recently with this. This is 20 years after the fact, or
right.
15 years after the
fact.
fact.
So you didn't do anything at the time?
No, nothing. Well, at the time, the showrunners figured out what was going on behind the scenes, and they did remove Brian Peck from the show, but he was working on children's shows just a year later. Which is kind of wild. And the thing about the political correctness tie-in that I want to bring up here is that Drake Bell's father was on set frequently, because parents have to be on set whenever their kids are involved in these shows, just to make sure there's nothing weird going on. And that's when Drake Bell's father does notice that something a little bit strange is going on with this Brian Peck guy. Mm-hmm. He's trying to do things like get in Drake's dressing room after scenes and undress the kid. Mm-hmm. And, the dad's like, hey, this is highly inappropriate. You can't be having this happen. So he goes and he talks to the showrunners. Mm-hmm. And at the time they tell him, oh, no, Brian's gay. He's not a weird guy. He's just gay. He's just kind of touchy-feely with kids. So, maybe you need to reevaluate and reassess your understanding of gay people and how they are, and back off. So they essentially, what happened there is gay people are what you would call like a protected class,
Right.
or they're people you
Right.
have to be
Right.
mindful about in terms of
Right.
political correctness. And this person was essentially being told that you are a bigot for viewing this type of behavior as anything other than just a gay person being a gay person.
Oh, okay.
So that's where I think political correctness can become potentially problematic when you have people who are nefarious actors operating under the protection of political correctness and knowing that they can get away with certain things because their actions will be excused for maybe the type of person they are.
Right. Right.
So
Okay,
that's
a good
kind of
point.
just
Right.
what I wanted to bring up about
Okay.
political correctness and why maybe it's not just a not good thing, but it can also be a bad thing
Right.
in our society.
Right.
So that's pretty much my thoughts on
Okay. So now we'd like to move on to part 2,
that. Right?
talking about social and cultural appropriation.
Right. So social and cultural appropriation. First off, we kind of need to define culture.
Okay.
So way back in 1871, this English anthropologist by the name of Edward Burnett Taylor said that culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society or acquired by humans as part of a society. He goes on to explain that culture isn't biologically inherited. Rather, it's the things you learn and the things you do when you belong to a particular group.
Okay. So it's the norms that you're brought into.
Right. Like, you don't learn English because you're a human. You learn English because you were born in England
Right.
or America or wherever. And so your language is part of your culture, not biologically inherent.
Okay.
So social and cultural appropriation, then. We have culture. What is appropriation? How do we appropriate that culture? By the Cambridge Dictionary, cultural appropriation is the act of taking or using things from a culture that is not your own, especially without showing that you understand or respect the culture.
Okay.
And in kind of contemporary usage, as we would use it between you and me, it's when someone from a dominant culture adopts or uses something from a minority culture, which we wouldn't even say minority
Right, we
culture
don't say that
anymore.
anymore.
And often it's to make a profit without respect shown to the culture that it was taken from.
Right. Okay. So now the only thing I would say to be contrary to that is I do think what we're talking about today is cultural appropriation. When I hear social appropriation, that social reminds me of society.
Okay.
Right? That's
Yeah.
the root, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And when we're talking about society, we're talking about all of us trying to live together.
Yeah.
And having some kind of social norms around that. So I really think we're talking about people's different cultures and appropriating those. So that's the only point I want to make with that.
Right. So in that vein, I'd like to kind of take this time, because we like doing this, to look at some of the things that have happened recently that can be considered cultural appropriation, or things that people have pointed towards in the media as cultural appropriation.
Okay.
So in 2022, Trader Joe's was accused of cultural appropriation when they declined to change some labels on some of their foods. So they were packaging Asian foods under the label Trader Ming's and Hispanic foods under the label Trader Jose's, which, okay, I got to apologize. I find that funny. I don't have any problem with that. And obviously, because I'm a white guy, that's probably the issue. I might feel differently if I was Hispanic or Asian, but
Yeah, you're not.
is that okay to say? Is that okay to say?
Well, what happened with it? Did they stick with the labels, or what did they do?
Yeah, they denied that the labels were racist. They didn't claim them to be really outrageous or outlandish, and there were no really stereotypical portrayals of either Hispanic people or Asian people on the labels. But they did recant those statements a few weeks later, and they changed the labels back to something that was less.
I'm thinking about Aunt Jemima. and Uncle Ben. Now, I understand historically that Aunt Jemima was an actual human being.
Oh, really?
Right?
I didn't know that.
And that renowned for her baking of pancakes, biscuits, whatever.
Oh, wow.
However, she probably didn't profit from
Probably not.
any of the usage of her image.
Likeness.
And then
Yeah.
when the parent company was called on that, they changed her image on the box from having a do-rag to
Right.
having a bouffant hairdo.
Yeah,
right?
I remember that. I
Like
remember
Betty
that.
Crocker, right?
Yep.
And so that is gone now. Both Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben, they cease to exist.
They're out.
But if she had started that brand herself and had her own image on the brand herself,
then it'd be fine.
That's okay?
Yeah, no,
right?
I think it'd be fine
Right,
because she's the one who is making
the
the money off
originator
it.
and
That's kind of a big part of this whole thing is it's
Who's
got to be
profiting?
taking something from one culture to another, and then the next culture that's taken to is profiting, not the original
Not the
culture
original
that
culture. Okay.
are the creators of it,
Okay.
right? So like, what are some other examples of it? So we have things like using sacred symbols for non-spiritual reasons. So these would be things like Native American headdresses, dream catchers, mandalas, which I see people get mandala tattoos all the time. Stuff like that.
Well, every kid that ever went to camp
They did
had
a dream catcher
because
Yeah.
they're going to go away camp and
Yeah.
they're freaking out already.
Even if you didn't go to camp, I remember making dream
Right,
catchers.
you
You
made
know,
dream catchers. So
Yeah.
and if we took that inappropriately
Yeah.
in an inappropriate way, I apologize, but
Right.
I think the sentiment of it was lovely, that it was going to kind of keep you from harm's way.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great sentiment, and I think that stuff like that should be shared or could be shared amongst other cultures without too much issue. Things like borrowing ideas without paying proper homage to their originators. That's kind of the idea of cultural appropriation in its entirety. Halloween costumes where you're dressing up as like an Indian or a Viking, where like you're just kind of this is my costume, and don't wear like a Native American headdress for
Right.
like a Native American costume if you're not, right?
I have a question about that. In your curriculum growing up
Yeah.
in elementary school, the third graders did a Native American powwow.
Yeah, we did a whole
You were
unit,
studying
a study.
Native Americans, right?
Yes.
And you each got to pick a brave name,
We did.
and you had feather headdresses.
We did.
And is that curriculum out the door now, or is that?
I mean,
or is it?
I imagine that something like that might be out the door. Or, I don't know. I don't remember if we specifically had someone who was Native American teaching us all of these things. If we did, I would think that would be fine because you have somebody who is part of the culture encouraging you to learn about the culture. And I have been to Native American reservations and partaken in Native American customs at the request of
what, gambling?
the chief. No, sweat lodge. Mom, please. God.
Sorry, that was
next thing you're gonna say is like drinking firewater.
Okay, that's totally inappropriate.
Yikes.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, so I've taken part in like a sweat lodge at the behest of the chief of the Native American tribe that we visited. So as long as there's
You're
somebody who is
participating with-
teaching
right,
you who
okay.
is part of the culture, I think that's very important. That's part of it. So maybe we didn't have somebody who was part of the culture teaching us.
I
So maybe
don't-
that would have been.
I
don't remember. I was like yay tall.
Yeah, I don't recall that.
So other stuff like Burning Man Coachella, which is basically just like pretty white girls dressing up as other cultures for like a weekend doing whatever. Miley Cyrus twerking at the 2013 VMAs was seen as culturally appropriative
Now,
at the time
is
because that's it's like a traditionally black person's dance, black women's dance, I think.
Okay. Didn't know.
The 2019 Dior.
Dior.
Okay, shows how much I know about fashion. With Johnny Depp, the name of the it was Sauvage, like savage, and there was a lot of Native American imagery and iconography used in the ads.
He's a little creepy.
He does weird stuff.
Yeah,
he does weird stuff.
He was so cool back in the day, but he's a little creepy now.
Well, you let a guy be Captain Jack Sparrow too long, and you see the hero become the villain.
Right.
The 2013 American Music Awards with Katy Perry's like geisha-inspired performance, people thought that was a little bit over the top.
Over the top.
Kendall Jenner's tequila brand 818. which hilariously has grammatical errors on the bottle. And
Intentionally?
I don't think so. I don't. Maybe, but I doubt it. And it doesn't, mention any of the workers, any like the Mexican workers that were used to make the alcohol or worked on the recipe for the alcohol. There was an Adidas shoe line that had Pharrell attached to it, and they used like South African words and imagery on the shoes, and they didn't even sell those shoes in South Africa. So
That's interesting.
That's kind of weird, right? Let's see. This you kind of made note of, or you keyed me in on this. Arthur Ray and his sweat lodge retreats. There was a guy who basically was a fake, shaman, and he would do these sweat lodges, and people died
Right.
during these sweat lodge retreats that he did.
Is this the ayahuasca guys?
Yeah.
Right. And that's clearly taking from another culture.
Yeah, that's clearly taken
And
from a
I
Native
think
American
you have a
culture.
shaman with you.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah. No, I think they call those guys like plastic shamans because they're like fake shamans, right? This one was an interesting one to me. There's apparently a San Francisco-based ice cream shop, and they sell Asian-inspired flavors, and
that's wrong?
I guess people were mad about that. I don't know what's wrong with that. I personally really love Asian flavors and Asian foods, so I would be all over this place. But I guess maybe they stole recipes or something, or they didn't pay proper homage.
Right.
I don't know. That one seems a little bit silly to me. Here's stuff that I think actually is big. Art theft.
Okay.
Art theft is a form of cultural appropriation, and that would be things like, anything from as simple as you taking an image that somebody else made online and you using it for something, all the way down to like the Nazi theft of European art during World War II, or you said something about Frank Lloyd Wright.
Okay, so Frank Lloyd Wright was notorious for not paying his vendors, so he was always in debt. And so he was commissioned in Japan to do some work. He goes over to Japan and he finds these beautiful Japanese prints that are, ridiculously cheap.
Yeah.
He buys outrageous amounts of them.
Like thousands of them, right?
He comes back to the United States and he sells them to his clients for a huge profit.
That's wild.
Right?
Yeah.
And people are thinking, wow, this is great stuff he brought back. But the truth is, the originators of this art did not benefit from the sale of that in the United States.
Yeah. So, stuff like that. There was a recent story of a World War II veteran here in Massachusetts who had like 20 plus pieces of Japanese art from like the Pacific Theater, from World War II Pacific Theater, stolen art. And this is the kind of stuff that I definitely think you can point to and say, this is like detestable.
Yeah.
This is absolutely horrifying stuff. Stealing cultural work from another group of people entirely, and then hoarding it, and like eventually I would assume we would be claiming it as your own. That's insanity. That is like completely erasing the contributions of a culture to the world. So I think that stuff is definitely like really, really bad.
Yeah. Was it okay to take stuff from the Germans after we won World War II?
What did we take?
Their silverware, their china.
I don't think so. I don't really claim to know a lot about how war works in actual practice when you have like urban warfare and soldiers moving from house to house. Right. You take what you can scrounge. Right. Like we've all seen the war movies where I think it was Band of Brothers. The guy's trying to get a German Luger. He's trying to get a Luger the whole time, right? Yeah, I imagine that there's some stuff that went on there, and I think that's also pretty detestable. Maybe if you're taking something off of a dead soldier, that's like okay, but if you're taking like art, or if you're taking cultural like statues or documents, books, things like that, movies, that's where it gets a little bit. Somebody
in that Band of Brothers does end up taking some kind of documentation.
He does, right? And then it's like, that's not good,
yeah,
right?
That's not okay.
It's like, the good guys won, the boys won, but So other stuff that's kind of like a little bit less interesting. There was like a tortilla recipe issue where some women were making handmade tortillas out of a Kook's Burritos food truck, and I think this was in Portland. And they went and they studied, or they took recipes from actual Mexican women and used those recipes as their own, and were making turning a good profit out of it until somebody figured that out, and they were like, eh. So
in other words, if the food truck had acknowledged that this recipe was from elsewhere,
yeah,
and had provided some level of profit back to the women
who essentially taught them,
that would be different.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. It's definitely one of those things where you give credit where credit is due.
Right.
You know, I've always been told that in a working environment where you give credit if another person deserves credit, because that shows a willingness to not just say, oh yeah, I did all this myself. You know, it shows humility. It shows humbleness. So their food truck did shut down though in 2017 when that happened.
Oh well.
A lot of food bloggers don't really pay too much attention to the cultural significance of the dishes that they make. A lot of food streamers not really doing any of that. Saturday Night Live had a small incident where Michael Che, who wrote this sketch Gen Z Hospital for an episode featuring our favorite billionaire Elon Musk, was criticized because the sketch was supposedly mocking Gen Z slang, but a lot of the phrases that they brought were actually African American slang phrases. So
and Elon Musk is the one saying them.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so it's like it didn't go over well. It didn't go over very well. Anyway,
that guy can barely speak English, let alone
something's going on with him. He's anyway. So that's kind of some of the stuff that I found. What kind of stuff did you?
Some of the things that I'm
look through.
Very interested in talking about is blackface, which is non-black performers appearing on stage in makeup that is black to have the appearance of black.
Yeah, usually like it was shoe polish. I think they used, right?
And this was used in vaudeville times and whatnot, and it kind of after that it hit its natural "this is not okay" stage. However, I remember seeing Holiday Inn, which was probably made in the 50s, with Bing Crosby, and there is a scene where he doesn't want his girlfriend to be recognized as a performer, so he has her appear in blackface, and I'm surprised that made the cutting room floor of that movie, because even at that time, the lawn jockey was gone. And so
even at this time, things
this
were
stuff was
phasing out.
Yeah, it wasn't okay. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
There's all of those Native American iconography in sports.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And so we all have heard about this because everybody's had to change their ways.
Right.
For instance, the Washington Redskins are now the Commanders, and of course, the Redskin is a very derogatory term towards a Native American.
Yeah.
Don't want to be pointed at the color of their skin, and then the skin part of them skinning persons and stuff. So just not okay. Chief Illiniwek from the University of Illinois represented the Fighting Illini. And the term Illiniwek comes from 12 tribes that settled in the greater Illinois area.
Okay.
And the university adopted that term about 70 years ago, and they had Chief Illiniwek, and he would dance around in full regale at every football game.
Right.
And they got rid of him, and they have not replaced. They are still the Fighting Illini.
They're still the Fighting Illini, right?
But they have not replaced him with any mascot.
They have no mascot.
They have no mascot.
Okay.
But the thing that's weird about that is I was in Florida, I don't know how long ago, but this occurs today. The Florida State Seminoles, they bring in a bare-chested, brave Native American on a big horse.
Yeah, and he throws the spear into the ground, right?
He's got a flame on a spear, and he throws it into the ground to intimidate the opponents.
Right.
This still occurs. I don't know if the person on the horse is Native American or not, but this is a practice that still exists.
maybe that's the one Native American student that they get every year. You know, they're like, okay, you can come to our school, but you got to be the guy. And you got to get really buff. You got to work out. You got to be where you. And I mean, Mom, you know, I got one thing to say to that though. It's Florida.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
It's Florida. Exactly.
You know.
And then of course there are the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah.
Which this isn't just about the name Cleveland Indians. That if you remember that brave, that imagery.
Yes.
That it looked like a crazy person.
It had like the big teeth and stuff. It did look like the very stereotypical portrayal, kind of like what you would see in like a 1940s or 50s Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Right.
Yeah,
awful. So they're now the Guardians, although I've been on planes and people are talking about their beloved Indians and they're like, I'm never calling them the Guardians. So,
of course they're not.
You know,
well, I'm never calling it the Willis Tower.
Yeah, neither am I. And then, of course, the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah,
they merit mention. So their first owner was a guy named Fred McLaughlin. He served in the war, and he was a commander of the 333 Machine Gun Battalion in the 86th Infantry, and that was called the Black Hawk Division.
Okay.
So when he buys this or creates the Blackhawks, it's an homage
to that.
Now, the Black Hawk Division is in honor of the Sauk war leader Black Hawk, an actual Native American.
So that is like a Native American
is a historical
original.
Figure. It is a historical figure.
Okay.
So the Black Hawk was fought to defend his tribe in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
So the team says they're never changing this. It's an homage to Black Hawk the Brave.
Okay.
The leader Black Hawk.
Yeah.
And his legacy. And so they have no plans to change that. But honestly, in my opinion, it's because they have the coolest jersey in the hockey and national hockey.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the rule of cool does apply if you look at the difference between like what the Chicago Blackhawk logo looks like currently versus what the Cleveland Indians logo used to look like. You can very clearly see a massive difference between the portrayal there.
Right. And the imagery is it's beautiful. It's art.
It looks incredible. Yeah. I mean, you see the big Brave with the feathers on the white jersey. It's so colorful. It looks nice. Yeah.
And then Coachella Valley High School.
This one shocked me when I saw this.
Their team name is the Arabs.
Yeah. Like, how do you get away with it?
They used to have a belly dancer come and jiggle around the center court.
Yeah.
And then a black-haired mustache mascot wearing a headscarf rallies the crowd. The school has dumped both of those mascots.
That might be good.
But they are keeping the name.
They're still
Arab.
the Arabs.
They're still the Arabs.
Do you think there more like Arab people go to that school?
I don't know. I don't know.
I wonder.
Know. And then the Atlanta Braves and of course the Kansas City Chiefs. There's pressure on them.
Pressure to change those names.
What
about your fiance, your forever fiance, is a Notre Dame grad? What about his own Fighting Irish? Don't people take offense to this?
Right. I personally think the little Fighting Irish guy is very offensive.
Yeah.
Because to Irish people, I mean, it's like he's a little fighting guy.
Yeah, he's a little like leprechaun.
And he's like a little leprechaun, and he might be,
drunk or not.
I don't know.
Who knows? That's probably why he's fighting.
I don't know.
Who knows?
So I think that's bad news. I never want to see that. And then on a more serious note, there is stolen from Japanese and Mongolian culture was the swastika.
Yeah, this was interesting.
Not
a lot of people know this.
Yeah, it was adopted by the Germans in the 30s. That crooked cross was the sign of the German party.
Yeah.
And let's just say, sports fans, let's not
try to make that.
Let's not have any swastikas anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No. Just maybe avoid that in general.
And I think that the headscarves worn by Arab men, the Arab keffiyeh.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So like, I've seen that in like protests recently, specifically with the Israel and Gaza situation, the Israel-Palestine situation, that you are seeing, I guess, allies wearing keffiyehs, and that's I don't know much about the cultural significance of the keffiyeh. I suppose I think there's some differentiation between whether it's black checks, red checks, or it's like a completely white one. I think there is something there that demarcates some difference between them, but
Right.
I don't personally know if it's sacred. I don't really know
either.
how people really feel about it. Like if you are a Muslim person who wears a keffiyeh regularly in your life, and you see some American college students, you know, chanting slogans wearing keffiyehs, do you feel good about that? Do you feel bad about that?
Right.
I don't really know. Personally, I wouldn't go to an Arab country as a white person and just be wearing one.
Although you know that
maybe I would talk to somebody and I would ask them about it, and I would ask them if it was respectful for me to wear one, and if they said it was, then I would wear one.
But as a woman being in Palestinian Muslim sections of Israel, which I traveled to, or you know,
yeah, you went to Israel,
right? You had, as a woman, you had to wear a hijab.
Okay, so you did have to cover your head.
You had to cover your head.
You had to cover your head.
And so I culturally, I want to be respectful. I think it's maybe not when you go to their country, it's when it's in our country, which doesn't require any of that.
Yeah.
And then you have somebody outside of that culture wearing it. But is it, if it's an ally or somebody who's supportive, I don't know the answer.
Yeah. You know, I've heard the kind of idea that the reason why people don't like cultural appropriation is because sometimes it feels like one culture, like a white person, is donning the appearance of another culture, like for a day, and then they can just go and not be that culture
Right.
the very next
They
day,
haven't had the
and
struggle.
get rid of the
Right.
cultural trappings, like the struggles that culture has had to go through. So that's why I would think it would kind of be an issue, because I don't think a lot of people here in the States have gone through many of the issues that people in the Middle East have gone through.
Right.
You know, but then again,
Right.
you know, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's the Sikh turban, which is, of course, associated with Arab countries.
Right.
And in 2018, Gucci sent all their models down the runway in Milan with turbans on, Sikh turbans. Now, I don't know if this is, you're paying homage to that culture. I don't know if that's appropriation, but it seems like some designer got up in the morning and said, hey, I think those are pretty cool. I think I'll use them, and has no connectedness to that culture.
Perhaps, yeah. That's probably what it is, right?
I don't know. Hairstyles, there's people who put chopsticks in their hair.
Right.
You're not from that culture. I don't know. You should be doing that. Dreadlocks.
Dreadlocks are a weird one, because some people think that they're okay because, Vikings had dreadlocks back in the year 1000, so white people can wear them, but there's varying levels of proof to that. Apparently Vikings also had combs, and if you have combs, then you're combing your hair, which means you're not getting dreadlocks. Companies that sell dreadlocking products have to actually preemptively state that they're just selling a product, they're not trying to culturally appropriate, so that they have to jump in front of criticism.
So they're trying
to make sure that they are within.
And then and
things,
there's the famous cornrows, which any kid who went on a
Caribbean vacation,
islands, right?
Yeah.
Went to the islands or whatever, comes home with the cornrows, and famously the whitest girl in the world, Bo Derek, sports it through the whole movie, 1979 movie of 10.
Yep.
And that had never been seen before. The white woman.
That was something that was pretty outrageous at the time, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about. You talked a little bit to me about spirit animals and how culturally important that is to Native Americans. And then you hear people joke around now. That's my spirit animal.
Yeah.
A squirrel's my spirit animal.
Yeah. Right.
And that's a very serious thing.
That's a pretty serious thing in Native American culture. And I think, you see it all the time. Like I saw just the other day on Facebook, somebody, a friend of mine made a post, oh my God, this is my spirit animal. And it was like a sloth. And it was hanging out in a tree, just chilling, going so slow. And I'm like, look, I get it. You like hanging out.
I get it.
You like chilling. You like relaxing. But maybe just say, this animal embodies me as a person. I identify with this animal.
Right. Right. We talked. I don't know if we talked about a plastic shaman.
Yeah,
But
yeah, a little
that's,
bit with
you know,
that guy who killed those
but
3
that's,
people.
That's
Yeah.
essentially somebody who's taking some other culture's
Practices. Yeah.
healing techniques,
Yeah.
indigenous healing techniques, and passing them along as their own, and maybe not okay. Tattoos. There's Celtic tattoos. There's all kinds of tattoos that people put on their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Some people feel that you can't take from another culture and put it on your body. David Beckham has, the beautiful Victoria's name written in Hindi on himself, and that was offensive to the Hindu community. I think it's his body. He can.
Sure. I agree with that. And there was actually a really funny instance of another couple of athletes who went back and forth about this. And it's funny, we just mentioned dreadlocks, right? So Jeremy Lin, that
Right.
Chinese-American
Right.
guy, had dreadlocks for a period of time. And he was called out by this other dude, Kenyon Martin, a black guy, who had like Chinese tattoos on him, which then Jeremy Lin called him out for his Chinese tattoos. So it's like, maybe you live in glass house, don't throw some of these stones,
right,
bro.
Right,
Like,
right.
come on.
But then, I think our tolerance for that kind of stuff, we have to be more tolerant of it and
yeah, I don't think it's that
respect
big of a
people's
deal.
choices
I don't think
or
it's that big of a
whatever. I
deal.
don't know.
I kind of agree with you.
And and then there's a plastic patty, which I am every
St. Patrick's Day or every Notre
I'm
Dame
guilty
game
of
you
this.
go
Every
to.
Notre Dame game I go to.
Yeah.
I'm like someone who's excessive about celebrating Irish heritage, which I of course have none, but I do appreciate St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
So, and then there's the idea of moving into music.
Yeah, this
Right?
is a big topic.
Okay.
Is cultural
So,
appropriation in music.
jazz, blues, rap, all of music. Traditional African American music came out of slavery.
Yes.
And there was songs that were rhythmic and a cappella that were used while they were working to kind of keep their mind off the horrible work that they had to endure, and even as to raise their own morale and to express anger and frustration in what they were doing.
Yeah.
And you take that forward into the 1800s, 1900s, and that music is the roots of early Southern jazz.
Right.
And that early Southern jazz then, which was performed by predominantly black entertainers, then gets adopted again as Southern rock, Southern blues, and the person who gets criticized for this a lot is Elvis Presley.
Right.
Commonly appropriating the music of African Americans.
I think specifically Muddy Waters. He appropriated.
Yeah. And so there is that idea that this wasn't new.
Yeah.
He just took it over.
Yeah.
And then I've just done kind of a deep dive on Paul Simon. Just actually recently watched his documentary that's out now. And he talks about his musical journey. And when he went out on his own from Simon and Garfunkel, he does Graceland. He travels the world to find... he's listening for certain types of sounds and rhythms.
Yeah.
He travels specifically to South America. He travels to South Africa, and he collaborates with these musicians in those countries.
Yeah.
And he makes something that sounds super new for Paul Simon, but to those people, it sounds like their
same
music.
Same old.
And
yeah.
and he says this in the documentary. He said, "Well, but I paid them 3 times as much as they would ever get in their countries. So, I took care of them. But at the other end of the spectrum, did they see any of the profits?
Like the royalties or whatever that comes out of that?
From that Graceland album,
Yeah, probably
which is
not.
an iconic album,
Probably
right?
not.
So probably not. So I feel like music is always changing and evolving.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And so
definitely,
I think in his mind, what he's trying to say is, I found these fascinating, and I wanted to be part of it, right?
Yeah. I think it's fine to go out and search for, if you're a musician, it's fine to go out and search for new music styles to expose yourself to and do different music. I mean, if you look at Taylor Swift, she started out as a little country girl, right? And now she's a big pop star. And her style has definitely changed over time.
And Beyonce's a country star now.
Yeah, and Beyonce's a country singer now, right? So clearly, there's a lot of crossover musically between styles, and I don't think there's anything specifically wrong with, say, Paul Simon's journey to go find these different sounds that he's looking for. I think maybe, hopefully, even he can understand how silly it is to say, well, I paid them 3 times as much as they would have made in their country, when
he knows
how much would you get paid for that in his country? Right. He should be paying them what they would make in his country.
Well,
at least,
and maybe even more, more than that, because that was a wildly successful moment in his career.
Yeah.
And I have always thought, every time I hear Sting, that there's always this appropriation of the Jamaican
culture and sounds.
Jamaican cultures.
Yeah.
Now, but I do think that there's people who want to collaborate with these people to do that.
Oh, sure.
So, I don't know. And Eminem, very white, very respected
very
rapper.
White.
Very white, very respected rapper.
I wonder how he would feel about you saying that.
Well, you are what you are.
Yeah, I guess so.
And then there's...
You heard it here first. Eminem, very white.
In case he didn't.
Yeah.
So I look at this more as a blending of cultures and paying homage to those that came before and those that created the sound. But I also think that there has to be some sensitivity to the economics of the situation. That these people should be provided an appropriate economic windfall if somebody else, if it's,
there definitely is something to be
gravy,
said.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't necessarily typically related to this, but I was watching the national championships of high school dance troops.
Oh, very exciting.
The Calabasas squad performed. Calabasas, California.
Okay.
They were 6-time national champions.
Jeez.
In the hip hop division.
Okay.
There was not one person of color on the squad.
It was all white girls?
All white girls.
Oh, there's something wrong with that.
That's wrong to me.
There's something wrong about that.
I don't know. Those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think bringing it into music, if we've talked kind of in general terms about artists that have maybe taken influences from different places, but there have definitely been instances where an artist or a person has taken something directly that is like just a song. They have paid a tiny pittance for the rights to it and then brought it to the greater world, and it was hugely massive hit. And one of the best examples of that is Evening Birds wrote a song in 1939 called Mbube, or Lion. And that is the song that we all know as "In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight."
Okay.
So that's that. Sorry, everybody.
And that is now
that,
part of the Lion King too, right?
Correct. That was, I think, Elton John wrote that music.
Not that music.
So that music was sold by the original creators for 10 shillings, which is the equivalent of $42 US today.
Wow.
It went on to sell 100,000 copies. And eventually, in the year 2006, Disney settled with them out of court. So there was an eventual payment for this happening 65 years later, 66 years later. Right. And I think this is a very, very straightforward example of cultural appropriation and exploitation, because what you see here is essentially like a poor African-American person or black person or person of color creates something, and it's beautiful. It's something that people instantly feel a connection to and love. And then a white person comes in, pays them Paul Simon 3 times what they would have made in their country.
Right.
And then it goes on to be a massive hit for whoever holds the right to it, and they get to make all this money off of it. So that's harmful, because it's representative of a class imbalance where one group who is the group in power,
Right.
can essentially just wholesale steal
Right.
something from another group that is a little bit more oppressed or significantly more
Oh,
oppressed.
you mean like putting Native Americans buying their land in New York City?
Yeah,
like
you know,
that,
for like beads and
right.
stuff.
$25.
Essentially, what they're doing is they're taking advantage of these people's situation, these people's desperation, or maybe their ignorance, and using it to their advantage.
Right.
And
Right.
you know, they gave them a pittance while banking the lion's share. You know, sorry, I had to.
Bad pun. Very
Bad pun. Of the profits for themselves.
Right.
So, you know, things like that, that's definitely a very, very harmful thing, I think. Because I think what we as creators, what creators and content creators really, really struggle with is when people take their content and they just use it for some other purpose, and the original content isn't interacted with and doesn't generate any sort of revenue of any
Right.
kind, and
Right.
that other person who took that content and interacts with it,
Right.
their video that they made or their whatever they made out of it,
Right.
they get all the money for it.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like all this work has been done initially to create something, and then somebody else just is like, oh, here's a couple bucks, I'll take that. Oh, now I'm a millionaire. So I think that's a huge issue.
Is there there's terminology for this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so I think people have been coming across this term recently, or have been using this term more recently, and it's called racial plagiarism. And that kind of essentially highlights this exact phenomenon where one group from a specific, you know, ethnic group takes something from another ethnic group and, you know, culturally appropriates it. So these groups' resources, their knowledge, their labor, their cultural heritage, everything is exploited for the benefit of the dominant group. And this is kind of what happens here is twofold, because this maintains the dominant socioeconomic relationship
Right.
between the dominant culture and the exploited culture.
Right.
So it not only allows the people in power to reap reward with no effort, it also has no corresponding improvement in the lives of the people that
Right.
created
Right.
whatever that is.
It keeps the status quo.
It keeps the status quo.
Right.
And so they constantly sustain this inequity.
Right.
And it's so interesting because you even see things happen that are like subconscious biases that eventually arise from situations like this. There was a study recently done of English language books published by major houses between the years of 1950 and 2018.
Okay,
so
so
this is a
current.
span of like 70 years almost, and it goes pretty current. And it showed that 95% of the books that were published by these major houses were written by white authors. And even in the last year of the study, in 2018, that percentage was 89%, almost 90%. So the vast majority of these publishing houses are strictly publishing white authors. And the percentage of American people that are white is like 58, 60%.
Right.
So
There's an
realistically, if you're talking about, you know, we're trying to achieve like equality of opportunity, you know, there should be like 60% of those
Right.
books are written by white people, and then the rest of them are written by people of other ethnic demographics.
Now, I have two thoughts on that.
Yeah.
One is I brought this in today because this is an award-winning book.
I remember this. Yeah.
Award-winning book, and it's Tiki Tiki Tembo, but the first chapter of it is Tiki Tiki Tembo, no sa rumbo, chari ruchi, pitperi pembo has fallen into the well.
Right.
And it is
What a name.
retold by Arlene Mosel. No relation. This is culturally a Chinese story, which was even taken from the Japanese.
Really?
This is
No kidding.
This is a very famous telling of why names are like Chan and
Very short.
very short names.
Yeah.
And Arlene Mosel said she, remembers hearing it as a kid, and so she writes the book, and it's illustrated by Blair Lent. Again, not of these cultures at all.
Yeah.
Not of these cultures, whether it's Chinese or Japanese, and beautifully illustrated.
Yeah.
and it is an award-winning book, and it is in the top 50 children's books. It
Of
is,
all time?
Yes.
Wow.
It is
That's
a
amazing.
phenomenal book,
Yeah.
but the story was taken from a different culture and written by people not of that culture.
That's interesting.
So I don't know what to make of that. I'm going to read my grandgirl this book because I love it so much, but I am mindful now that
Maybe that's a bit appropriative. I wonder if there are stories, though, that have been kind of spread across cultures like that over time. I wonder if there are any stories that have been taken from like other cultures and used by like the Chinese as like a children's story, or
I don't
by
know.
the Japanese as a children's story.
Probably,
I wonder.
Probably.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to say about writing and
publication
and
stuff.
publications and
Yeah.
representation. So this year, an Oscar-nominated film, American Fiction. It's a great telling of a black professor who's a writer,
Yeah.
and his the white publishing establishment doesn't want him to write about what he wants to write about.
Okay.
He's very cultured, and they want him to write, something that talks about the struggle and portrays African American people in a very not positive way.
So,
Okay.
so
he writes a spoof,
okay.
and it ends
gosh.
up winning awards.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Okay. But it's such an important movie to
Yeah.
see the struggle that this guy has arrived in the world. He is somebody who is, just at the top of his career.
And he's he's an author, right? Like
He's
a
an
professor.
author. He's a professor and an author.
Okay.
And,
So he's a smart guy.
right? And so he has to write as a professor.
Yeah.
He has to publish.
Yeah.
And they're not interested in publishing what he really wants to write about. So that's just and of course it's a fictional story,
Yeah.
but it is so well done. It's worth seeing.
Yeah. I think I'll have to watch that because it did look very interesting. It does look, because I think I see all the previews of it where he's doing simple things like changing words from my pathology to my pathology.
Yeah.
With an F
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah.
To mimic like African American
Right.
vernacular
Right.
English.
Right.
So.
Right. And so then we come to films, which
Yeah.
I love to talk about films and how cultural appropriation is just all over
It's
the
all
place.
over. It's all over.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whitewashing is a term that white actors are used to portray non-white
Right.
people and ethnics.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I was a kid growing up, and I think these movies were made between 1926 and maybe stopped in the early 80s, there was a series of Charlie Chan movies. And Charlie Chan was a detective. He was Chinese. And he was supposed to be, when he first came out in the 20s, he was supposed to be like the antithesis of the evil Chinese man.
Oh, okay.
Right? Okay, so this was a spin to make him, to anglicize him, I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay. And the storylines were terrific. He was very smart, but it was also stereotypic.
Yeah.
He was smart. He was subservient to the white people in the films, and he was effeminate.
So he's like the model immigrant or whatever they call that, right?
And the Chan character was never portrayed by a Chinese person.
Wait, the guy is a Chinese detective and he's not portrayed by any
all
Chinese
of them were
guys?
the American actors that portrayed Charlie Chan were Warner Olin, Sidney Toler, and Rowan Winters. They slanted their eyes. They gave them heavy accents.
Of course they
and
did.
And they were on their way. And I actually loved these. And I was a little kid. I didn't know, and yet it's a horrible portrayal. And so there's other whitewashing in films too.
I mean, you said it was made from the 30s or the 20s, to the 80s.
Right.
So I imagine that that's a product of its time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And Mickey Rooney is famous for portraying a Japanese man in Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Yeah.
And he's kind of a crazy Japanese man. He can't just be. Al Pacino was portrayed as a Cuban in Scarface.
Or he was portraying a Cuban. Yeah.
Emma Stone, this is my favorite, in the movie Aloha, she is supposed to be half Asian. I mean, this girl has freckles on her face. Come on.
Yeah, she apologized for that.
I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's, getting back to Johnny Depp, he's Tonto in The Lone Ranger movie.
Yeah, what's up with him and the Native American stuff?
I don't know. I don't know.
I
don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I suppose you're not supposed to delve into other cultures as an actor, but, you're a voice actor, right? A voice talent. Do you have issues with using dialects?
I mean, personally, so what I've kind of come across in my work is that as you get bigger, as you become more and more prominent as a voice talent, you tend to actually pigeonhole more and more unless you're certain types of people. And what I mean by that is, since I do a lot of smaller kind of online narratives and things that you might not hear that much, I basically have free reign to do just about any sort of accent and any sort of dialect I want to. And in fact, some of the work that I have done that kind of style or that have had that kind of approach, I've seen tons and tons of comments from people saying, "Oh my God, the voice actor is incredible. The voice acting is great." And I sit there and I think, well, that's really nice to hear. But at the same time, I hear about shows that are very, very popular, like Family Guy. Let's take Family Guy, for instance. They have a character on the show whose name is Cleveland Brown. He's a black guy. And for a while, he was voiced by a white dude. But at some point along the way, that guy stepped down and they had a black guy come in and voice him. And, I suppose that if you're somebody who is getting work on Family Guy, then you're probably not a voice actor who is struggling. You're probably doing pretty okay. So that guy can probably afford to give up that role and let somebody else take it on. But I don't think there's anything really wrong with doing that. I don't think there's anything really wrong with acting, which is the profession.
It's acting.
It's acting. Yes. As another person that you are not. That's kind of the whole thing. So when other shows, like there was another show that replaced a certain voice actor with somebody who matched the character's skin color called Big Mouth, and they even they had dialogue in the very next season that highlighted the fact that they did that, and they're sitting there saying it was the right choice. Yeah, you guys did the right thing. And so they're trying to make it seem like it's a bad thing, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't give these like if a character is black in the show, that you shouldn't give that role to a black voice actor. Right. But what I am saying is that if you have a show and you have a limited budget and you have a limited number of people that you can hire, which everybody has to work in a budget, and you have somebody like a Mel Blanc that can do a million voices, you use that talent. Like there's this guy on Family Guy, John Viner, who does hundreds and hundreds of voices for the show, and he does all sorts of different ethnic voices. He does black people, he does Indian guys, he does white people.
One of our favorite comics, Robin Williams.
Yeah,
he did all kinds of voices.
Yeah, he did all sorts of voices. I personally think it's okay, but I mean there are plenty of people out there who take issue with, say like me sounding like doing an Indian person accent. And I won't do that here, but like that's strictly my voice acting.
In conjunction with that, Eric McCormick, who portrayed Will on Will and Grace for so many years, was not gay.
He's not gay.
Not gay.
Yeah.
And he does not apologize for that.
And there are plenty of gay guys that play straight dudes, right?
Right. And because he
like every guy.
And so
maybe not everyone.
He says, there's plenty of examples of heteros playing gay, and there's plenty of gays playing heteros. And it's a job. It's called acting.
Yeah,
that's his take
acting.
on it. That's his take on it.
It's acting.
So there's oodles of examples that we can go through. But you wanted to talk about movies.
Yeah, I wanted to do a little section of the show to just have kind of fun with it, and not talk about anything too serious, but just kind of take a like a little thought experiment, almost, if you will. And and this is not strictly things that are culturally appropriative. They also are a little politically incorrect as well. So we're bringing that back into it. But I wanted to think about movies and TV shows that were made at a time and maybe couldn't be made today.
Okay.
For whatever reason. So the first kind of, things I've come across, and this is in no particular order,
Okay.
just kind of what I found. There was a movie in 2003 called Tiptoes. Matthew McConaughey portrays a man who was born into a family entirely comprised of little people. He's the only person of regular stature in this family, and it's a rom-com. It's a romantic comedy where he finds a girl, and he's...
Can you say regular stature?
I think so.
Or can you say... Tall.
I don't know.
I don't know, right?
I don't know what word you would even use to say it's normal. You
can't say normal.
You can't say normal.
Can't say
no,
normal.
that's bullshit. Anyway, sorry.
Eric, please.
Yeah. So yeah, he has to introduce his girlfriend to his whole family, and then obviously shenanigans. It's portrayed as a humorous situation.
Right.
That one I think would be pretty tough to make today. I'm not sure that you could do that today.
Well,
and it would play the same.
Could you do the Lollipop Gang from the Wizard of Oz?
I don't know. Well, they didn't they do a Willy Wonka movie recently where they just literally shrunk down Hugh Grant?
Oh yeah,
it wasn't even a little person. It wasn't even a midget.
They shrunk him
So yeah, excuse me, little person, not midget. So I think that they're even getting around that, which is funny because that means that little people are losing
getting
work.
jobs.
They're not getting hired.
Peter Drinkler will not be happy.
Right?
About
Dinklage.
that.
Yeah, Peter Dinklage won't be happy. This one people talk about a lot as far as whether it could be made again today. But in 2008, Tropic Thunder came out, and this was a Ben Stiller, Robert Downey Jr. movie that essentially is highlighting the absurdity of Hollywood in its attempt to be create Oscar material. Right. So it has Ben Stiller portraying at times a mentally handicapped person. It has Robert Downey Jr. in blackface for the entire movie, and I think what people highlight about that is that the Robert Downey Jr. blackface thing, they don't think that that's cool. Now I think it was done in a way that it's essentially, you're not laughing at the fact that this white person is doing blackface. You're laughing at the white person who is doing blackface because he is so absurd and he doesn't understand how bad that is, how wrong that is.
Right.
And it's kind of just going even a step further to say, well, he's a method actor. He's like Daniel Day-Lewis. Obviously he has to become the person. Right. So it's silly.
Right. It is.
Right.
It is ridiculous. And that Ben Stiller has apologized for the acting developmentally disabled in the movie. But
I wouldn't.
Robert Downey Jr. says no. This was to satirize Hollywood and the lengths that people will go to try to get that award.
Right. He's not apologizing for having done the blackface. He's never done that. Right.
No.
So
and
I think that's right to not do that.
And it is a wildly goofy.
It's a ridiculous,
it's written by Justin
movie.
Theroux and one of the Coen brothers.
Yeah, and the Coen brothers are hilarious. They do a bunch of great work.
It's supposed to be absurd.
Yeah,
you can't.
Yeah,
you cannot. But you're right.
So,
I don't know that could be made today.
I think it could, but I think people would be a little bit sensitive about it. You're right. I think people are more sensitive now than they used to be. Another movie, Revenge of the Nerds from 1984, which is a film about a group of nerds who cause chaos through pranks and shenanigans all over their college campus. And I think this one couldn't get made today because there is a scene where one of the nerds sleeps with one of the girlfriends of the jocks, but the girl thinks that she's sleeping with her boyfriend. So essentially, she's sleeping with a guy who's not the guy that she thought it was, which I think we classify as sexual assault or even
sexual,
rape.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's a rape scene in there that wouldn't fly. Blazing Saddles. This is another one I think is like Tropic Thunder that you could definitely make this today as long as people understand that you are laughing at the three characters that the movie is following. Right. You're not laughing with them because they're horrible.
Well,
people.
Mel Brooks. I mean,
he's a genius. He's made so many great things.
And there's also the producers.
Yeah.
And the Broadway play whereby they're trying to produce a play that will flop.
Yeah.
And it is Springtime for Hitler. I mean,
How absurd,
how
right?
could that be?
Yeah,
and there's
right.
there's a lot of humor around that. So,
Yeah, definitely.
Nobody thinks of Hitler as a particularly funny guy.
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So then Monty Python's Life of Brian from 1979 is about a man who is mistaken for the Messiah. So it's like a portrayal of the Messiah, essentially. And I think, without paying proper respect and reverence, I think religious people really don't like that. Especially religious people like Islam really doesn't abide by any sort of portrayals of Muhammad, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I think that would be tough to make today. I think this next one you strictly couldn't do.
Right.
Soul Man, which is a 1986 movie about a white dude who uses blackface to get a scholarship to college, which he would not otherwise be eligible for because it's like strictly reserved for black people. And he's in blackface like the whole movie, and it's an absurd, absolutely ridiculous film. And I really don't think that you could do that movie quite the same way that it was done.
Now, isn't there the opposite of that where the two actors in white chicks?
Oh yeah,
right.
Right? But I think you
no,
get away
this
with
goes-
it because it's punching up
Right.
versus the
Yeah.
punching
Got
down
it,
thing,
got it.
right?
That makes
That's the
sense.
whole
That
thing
makes
there,
sense.
right?
That makes sense.
But some people, you bring up a good point because some people would definitely say, "Well, what about when they do whiteface? Isn't that a problem?" It's like, bro, chill out.
I say bring it on.
Relax. This is one it's not about a race thing, but this is about gay stuff or gay people. I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry from 2007's Adam Sandler film about him and I think it's Kevin James, and they pretend to be a gay couple so they can get like tax breaks.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that you could really do that today.
Sure, you could do that today.
You think so?
I think you could do that.
Maybe.
Okay, although maybe it depends on what their portrayal is, because it's probably going to be very overt, like Tom Hanks was in that. Well, they dressed up like women. It was some TV show he was first in when he first came out.
Huh. I don't remember that.
It's
Obviously,
way before
my time.
Right?
Yeah.
Or Some Like It Hot with Jack Lemmon and
Okay.
Tony Curtis.
Yeah.
They are trying to they're trying to get a gig, and they have to pretend to be in an all women's band, so they're dressing up like women the whole time.
Yeah.
I don't, Tootsie, Dustin Hoffman, Mrs. Doubtfire. I think you can get away with that.
Yeah.
I think you can get away with that.
So this next thing is interesting because I'm moving on a little bit from movies into musicals because I feel like musicals get to play around a lot with how absurd they are, how ridiculous they are, how much they lean into these certain concepts. And you can kind of look towards, like, the Book of Mormon is a good example of a musical that really pushes the envelope with a lot of its comedy. But I don't want to talk about that. I actually want to talk about a musical from way long time ago that I think people really love, and people don't quite think about this as much as something that could be problematic, but The King and I. The King and I is a musical about a white teacher from a Western country, from England, right, I believe, who goes to the country of Siam, and it's the year 1860. And this country is essentially seen as barbaric, by the greater world at this time. And it essentially portrays this white teacher teaching the king of Siam and his people how to be civilized. So it literally is like the white savior complex immortalized as like Rodgers and Hammerstein's like pinnacle achievement in musical theater.
Right.
It's won, or it was nominated for 9 Oscars. The film, the film version, like a couple of years later, was nominated for 9 Oscars. It won 5 of them. It's got a 93% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The musical version won the 1952 Tony Award for Best Musical, as well as the Best Revival Musical when it was brought back in both 96 and 2015.
Well, Yul Brynner made an entire career out of being the king of Siam.
Yeah, right. And this, and every adaptation, every single adaptation of The King and I is banned in Thailand. because of its portrayal of the king.
Because that was Siam.
Yeah, because that was Siam, right? So those people clearly don't like it. They view it as highly offensive.
Huh.
So that I'm a bit curious about. You know,
so we can't sing "Getting to Know You."
I mean, you can sing it, but maybe not in Thailand. They might cut your hands off.
Okay, so I also like to talk about West Side Story in the same regard. So West Side Story is not Tony winning on Broadway.
Right.
Is made into a movie in 1960.
Yeah, 10 Oscars, I think.
10 Oscars.
Crazy.
It is about the street gangs, the white kids and the Puerto Ricans. The only Puerto Rican in the cast was Rita Moreno.
Yeah.
And she's the second lead.
Okay, yeah.
And she's Anita.
Yeah.
And then Maria is portrayed by Natalie Wood, who didn't even sing the songs.
Jeez.
But she was the ingenue at the time.
Yeah.
And, Rita Moreno expressed her discomfort with having her cast in it, but you couldn't fight City Hall at that moment in time because Natalie Wood was a very big star.
Right.
And the film itself, one of the most iconic songs in the film is sung by the Puerto Ricans, and it's I'd Like to Be in America.
Right.
And it talks about Puerto Rico being this dreadful, awful place that you have to escape from.
Yeah, yeah.
And Rita Moreno, who is Puerto Rican, who did emigrate from Puerto Rico, clearly says they cried when they had to come to the United States.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people didn't want to leave.
Into the Bronx and to Queens.
Right.
And they lived in this beautiful tropical paradise.
Yeah.
So she was very disappointed in that. And then Spielberg makes the movie in a couple years ago.
Right.
And even he gets criticized because even though he uses Hispanics, he doesn't use all Puerto Ricans.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
But he did use some Puerto Ricans?
He used a couple Puerto Ricans.
Okay.
But for the most part, he uses Hispanics across the board of various
ethnic backgrounds.
But not all Puerto Ricans. So even he gets. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned the Book of Mormon,
right?
Which I love the part where they're, mocking, the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons.
Yeah.
I love that.
But
then it gets super politically incorrect.
Yeah, very fast.
It goes to on their journeys. It gets into genital mutilation of women.
Right.
I don't even when I saw it, they had me until that came on the stage, and then I was out.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people that I've talked to who have seen that have had that exact same reaction where they are really like, it's funny, it's great, everything's going well, and then comes the FGM part.
Right.
And instantly they're like not on board with that.
Right.
And, you can say that might be taking it a step over the line or not. I'm pretty sure there's another joke at some point in the musical where a guy is like, he's got AIDS, and I guess in certain parts of Africa they believe that if you have AIDS you have sex with a baby and then it cures you of AIDS. So he says he's going to do that at some point in the musical.
Right.
And I think that part can lose people at that time. But
when this came out, AIDS was rampant.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, it's in certain parts of the world, it still is. I think here, we have a lot of stuff to deal with it now.
Drugs,
we have stuff to deal with it, but in certain parts, it's still rampant. And I would like to actually ask you to examine a bias here that you might have. You said it lost you when it brought up the FGM stuff, the female specific stuff, but nobody really talks about that when it comes to boys. And there is a country that we are in right now that kind of does that wholesale to boys, and we don't really talk about that too much. And I'm not saying I'm strictly, I want to make it clear for the viewers, I'm not saying that circumcision is anything close to those practices that they do in Africa. However, I do think it's interesting that that's where a lot of people get lost with the Book of Mormon. But I don't hear those people then say, wow, that made me really reconsider the practice of circumcision and how barbaric that is.
You want to know the difference?
Well, I know what the difference is.
But the purpose of the mutilation of the woman is to remove the pleasure
But if you actually have looked into the thing about circumcision, this guy Kellogg, like that's the same reason.
That too?
Same reason.
Yeah. Well,
so I don't want to go into that. Yeah. I don't want to talk about that. That's
another episode of Mom, Please.
Whole entire other thing. But I do want to highlight that maybe what their intention was is to have people think about that. And if that part does really lose you, then consider that. If that practice is so horribly offensive to you, maybe it should be that way for everybody. I don't know. Anyway.
Okay, moving on from
that. So
yes, you're
back into some of the stuff that I think couldn't be made today. TV shows.
Okay.
So we have the Honeymooners, which always had that line where the guy's like, one of these days, pow,
Alice,
straight to the moon, Alice.
Right,
and he's like, just domestic violence against women.
However, Ralph never hits Alice.
You did make this, yeah.
He
You did talk to me about this.
He never hits her. She always outsmarts him. She's smarter than he is.
Yeah.
And one of the closing lines, they hug and he says, "Baby, you're the greatest." That's almost one of the closing lines. So
you think that's fine because you would assume he never actually is going to do it,
right? And
it's just an empty threat.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
All right. Then another show that some people think that couldn't really be done today is MASH, which apparently many people view the character Hawkeye as very, very pushy and very forward when it comes to his sexual liaisons with women.
Oh, yeah.
Like
he's
almost like a rapist almost, but maybe not quite.
He is, and he is aggressive.
Yeah.
But then they also have Hot Lips Houlihan, the nurse.
Who's like
who's a female
counterpart of
And then
his,
you also have Jamie Farr, who is trying to get dishonorably discharged, so he wears dresses instead of uniforms. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to laugh at that. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. The Dukes of Hazzard is a show that I think actually probably could not be done today.
Why?
Probably because the General Lee with the giant Confederate flag painted on the roof.
I don't know, but they were Confederate.
Just because of the Confederate thing.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of
bad
things going on nowadays about people are like taking statues down of Confederate soldiers in the southern states and things like that. So they're just trying to not celebrate that history of the country whatsoever.
Right. That's a good
So I think that's possible. Married with Children, a show that ran from 87 to 97. There was lots of sexual humor and innuendo surrounding the daughter, Kelly, who I think is supposed to be like 16. So that's a little bit weird as far as just her age and how that's portrayed. And there are a lot of shots at her intelligence. She's portrayed as like super dumb. Is
she blonde?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. And then the father figure, Al Bundy, like people apparently he's just kind of a curmudgeon-y guy. People wouldn't be able to handle him.
Do we like him more in Modern Family?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot more.
Yeah, he's likable.
He's likable in that. Well, he's got a Hispanic wife, right?
Well, and he's, surrounded by every kind of person you can imagine.
Yeah. So, it's funny that he went from being that guy, Al Bundy, and Married with Children, to being like a complete opposite kind of guy, or very, very different, in his Modern Family character.
Right.
This is from your time, All in the Family and The Jeffersons, the two shows that were kind of, tied to each other. So Archie Bunker, of of All in the Family, was a horrible racist, like very bigoted, just a lot of anti-black, a lot of anti-gay humor.
Yeah. A lot of talking about Jewish people.
Right. And then George Jefferson is kind of like his counterpart.
Right.
The black version of him almost. And his deal was like his daughter was involved in an interracial relationship
his son.
So he's very not about that for a while, and so
but
there's all
both
that.
of those shows, those characters are the foils. Like everybody around them is smarter and figures out how, like in George's case, the neighbors who are a black and white couple, interracial couple, they help him out all the time. In Archie's case, he's got George, and they challenge each other all the time. I think Norman Lear was ahead of his time when that came out.
Okay, that's interesting. Another show kind of around that time was Sanford and Son,
Yeah.
and it just seems like kind of a theme where the head of the patriarch, Fred Sanford, is a bigot. You know, so it seems like these guys are all kind of like almost like foils of each other going on and down the list, because he's almost seen as a counterpart to Archie Bunker as well, and you know, from All in the Family. Kind of more from my time period, we have shows like Eastbound and Down, which is a Danny McBride show where he's a former MLB pitcher, Major League Baseball pitcher, and his career fizzles out. He's kind of disgraced, and he ends up going back to his hometown and teaching as a gym teacher, like a PE teacher. And it has a lot of really, really toxic attitudes towards women. Like his character portrayal is not a nice guy. He's a jerk. He's an asshole. And a lot of it is toxic towards the ladies. Women. So I think that's something that is difficult to do nowadays. Like the constant like shitting on women throughout an entire show you don't see that. You don't, and it doesn't play. It doesn't play.
Now we were talking about this the other day. So there's Peele and Key.
Key and Peele.
Yeah. Let me get it right. Keegan-Michael Key has this bit where he's a substitute teacher.
Oh, the sub teacher.
And
yeah.
This is so stereotypic.
Yeah.
I can watch that every day of the week and I will continue to laugh. I think it is funny. If he did it, he wrote it. They wrote it. I mean, they had to think it was okay.
Oh, sure.
And this isn't that old, right?
No. Key and Peele is pretty recent.
And so I don't know. I mean, you know, I laugh at it.
I think it's funny. You know, he's going like, "Hey, yo, Aaron," or like, my favorite is, "Oh, we're looking for D Nice. We got a D Nice in the bill," and it's like. Yeah, obviously he's portraying like an inner city or a teacher who has a lot of inner city experience, and he's in like a suburban high school or whatever, right? So it's a funny, you know, juxtaposition. It's two things together that don't really.
I think it's funny.
Yeah, I like that you've seen some of these Key and Peele sketches. I think that's a great show. These next two that I'm going to highlight are kind of interesting because I think they are highly politically incorrect and they don't. Nobody cares, and that would be South Park and Family Guy. Well, these both came out at around the same time. So South Park
is this Seth MacFarlane's work?
Family Guy is Seth MacFarlane, and then South Park is Matt Stone and Trey Parker. Okay. And so they came out around the same time. 97 was the first airing of South Park, and 1999 was the first airing of Family Guy. So I think because these came out in the 90s when people were way less concerned with the politically correct narrative, they entered the zeitgeist. They entered the public zeitgeist and became kind of part of our fabric of culture, similar to The Simpsons. And now, because that's what they were, they're allowed to be that kind of in perpetuity. So you have these episodes where, I mean, the first episode of South Park, I think one of the 8-year-old or 9-year-old school children gets an anal probe from aliens, and then a giant satellite dish is coming out of his butt at one point. And I don't think that's something that could get made today. I don't think you can portray a 9-year-old getting anally probed. Do you think
it's okay because it's cartoons?
Partly, definitely. Like
because it's not happening to real people.
It's not happening to real people. So I think there's a big part of it that it's definitely because it's a cartoon.
Now here's the operative.
And yeah, Family Guy is like similarly immature, racist, sexist. There's a lot of stuff going on, but they've been grandfathered into the pop culture.
Let me ask you this: South Park and Family Guy, how available was that in your household growing up as a kid?
Not at all. Like I was not. I wasn't like allowed to watch Simpsons. South Park, Family Guy.
I still hate these.
Yeah, you know, and you can hate them, but I think they're
Don't they
undeniably.
Blow up Kenny every week?
No, not anymore. They got over that. Okay. Kenny's chilling nowadays. Okay. He's cool. But yeah, they're part of like the cultural identity at this point, or fabric of what we view as pop culture. I think nowadays. So you know, you kind of have to accept that they're there. Something that in TV that bothers me a little bit, and this is just a rant that I'm going to go on a little bit just about political correctness. I think again, when did we stop portraying like gay men in media instead of or
You mean in
we're
shows?
portraying, we basically, I've seen a lot of things that have come out, a lot of shows or a lot of movies that have come out that have had like a big controversial gay scene that has caused a lot of kerfuffle in some communities, but every time it's a lesbian scene. And it was like I'm going to highlight things like Buzz Lightyear. The recent Buzz Lightyear movie had like a very small lesbian kiss scene that people went totally batshit over. Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker has a very small lesbian kiss scene. Everything Everywhere All at Once, that recent like mega Oscar, nominated film. The daughter is a lesbian.
Right.
Her whole story is like a lesbian story where she can't come out to the grandpa because he's got old world views. In the new Ted series, also Seth MacFarlane project, there's a character in it, Mark Wahlberg's or young Mark Wahlberg's cousin, a girl is gay or polyfluid, polyamorous.
Polyamorous.
She's interested in people for who the person is.
Right.
And I'm just curious about like, when did we stop having gay storylines where it was actually gay men? Is it if you want some gay media, do you have to specifically go seek something out like Dallas Buyers Club or like Milk?
I don't necessarily agree with you on this because I think there's plenty of portrayals of, like, I'm thinking about Schitt's Creek.
Yeah, that's true. The
Dan
son is
Levy
gay.
is
right.
And
I like him a lot too, by the way.
love
He's
him.
great. Yeah.
I think that a lot of these stories are put into motion by maybe some white guys, and I think white guys love to see lesbians make out.
Yeah, okay. I can see where you. I think lesbians making out's all right.
Okay,
I can see where you say
but
that.
But here's the thing that I'm concerned about. I was thinking about this when you were thinking about the portrayal of people, and one of the things that I'm sensitive now is like if there's an ensemble cast now.
Yeah.
There has to be like Friends probably couldn't be made the way it is anymore. There would be a black person in the cast. There would be a lesbian.
There'd be like an
in the
Asian
cast.
person. There'd be a lesbian.
There'd be an Asian in the cast. And my concern about that is I don't want to see tokenism.
Yeah, I
right.
Kind
I don't
of
want to
agree
see.
with that.
I don't want to see you put somebody in a position where they're just like the backdrop.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference between actually creating something that you're creating it because this character was written as a black person or as an Asian person or as a lesbian versus having something that was already written, kind of shoehorning one of the characters into this role, or the race swap thing, like, Black Little Mermaid, where it's just kind of pandering to these groups. It's not really... There's no reason why it needs to be this way. It's just this way because they're like, well, we did a story with white Little Mermaid. Let's do one with Black Little Mermaid. See if we get, that community on board with us. It's like, it's so obvious what's being done there. And it's kind of, I'm not going to say anything too much more about it because,
but that's my concern is when I see that and I see a cast and that there's just certain people put in the cast, and I'm not saying these aren't deserving actors or whatever. Right. I'm just saying I don't want that person to just be some fluff in the background.
Yeah, you don't want the tokenism.
I want them to be an important part of the storyline.
Yeah.
Right.
Have some good character development. Have some involvement in the story that's important. Just don't be like there.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So
now we're back to our.
Well, now we're headed back to a little bit of like so cultural. We've talked a lot about cultural appropriation, but I think what we haven't talked about is, why people don't like it quite so much. I mentioned this a little bit, but I think there's harm in when a culture is kind of shrunk. And it's reduced to a set of like disembodied gestures and things that aren't really representative of what the culture is. So like style without substance. Mm-hmm. So like when a non-indigenous person, say, speaks of having a spirit animal, that's like a bogus thing, because for Native Americans, those things are very real.
Right.
Those things are significant, and there is a cultural aspect to them, why they are important
Right.
and why they are real.
Right.
So our world is becoming more and more connected through
Right.
social medias, through everything, the 24-hour news cycle, everything that's bombarded at us all the time. So when we're in this connected world, it's so easy to just don the, Native American headdress, so to speak, and act as that culture for a day, and then not have to deal with any of the consequences or any of the hardships that culture has gone through. So there's a risk of what's called, culture instead of culture, where other people go on a tour of the cultures.
Oh, wow. That's good.
They're exploring them,
Right.
but
Right.
just for a little bit, just temporarily, and they don't have to actually engage with it in a real way that could be
Right.
negative in any sort of way.
Right.
And that concept, I just want to point out, is from a Korean-born German philosopher by the name of Byung-Chul Han. And that, if you want to read more about it, is in his book Hyperculture from 2022. So if you want to read more about that idea, you can do it there. So that's why it's problematic. And what I think we want to push more towards and talk more about what's good is cultural exchange or cultural appreciation, which is something that happens when two cultures of relatively equal amounts of power come together, and neither one is dominating the other, but they're sharing ideas, they're sharing goods, they're sharing services and other aspects of their culture freely with each other.
Right.
And they don't expect anything from that, and they don't expect to be given anything based on that. So it's not about one culture stealing from another to enrich themselves. It's about both cultures coming together, realizing that they have different things that they can share with each other, and they both enrich each other through that exchange.
Okay.
So, some examples of that could have been like the Silk Road, which has been active at various points in history, from as early as like the year 0, when Jesus supposedly was around,
What do you mean supposedly?
well, supposedly, to the 7th through the 10th centuries. There was a lot of exchange along these routes, and the 13th and 14th centuries, when the Renaissance brought back the European culture.
The Renaissance, though, I don't know. Right. Coming back between really appreciating different cultures, and there were a lot of Moors involved in that.
Yeah.
In
Definitely. There were a lot of like Muslim countries that were involved in that. There were a lot of influences from the classic eras, the Greeks, the Romans,
Right.
Scholars from around the world in like Byzantium, also provided many, many advancements to science and culture and mathematics at the time. So that was essentially cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle East.
Right. Okay.
Then there's the Columbian exchange, which, now we're getting into things that are maybe a little bit, there's good and bad here.
Right.
So that follows Christopher Columbus's voyage, and, from Europe to the New World. And there are some things that happen there that are good, like goods and services are exchanged between the native cultures and Europe, but also, there was widespread exchange of disease, warfare technology,
Right.
Various sorts of like alcohol, things like that were negative influence on the native indigenous peoples, as well as like slavery and
Right.
wholesale like warfare.
Right.
So, there's good and bad to that, obviously.
And taking things that were found in the New World back to
The old world.
The old world.
Yeah, and that just encouraged more people from the old world to go and do the
Right.
same in the new
Right.
world, right?
Right.
And as we know, different cultures from Europe had different views on what things were okay and what things were not okay during that time. So, some cultures could have been vastly more negative in their exchange than other ones, right? The Arab Islamic influences during the 6th to the 14th century, this kind of ties in with the Renaissance, where the Arab Islamic world made massive leaps in science, mathematics, medicine, architecture, philosophy during the Middle Ages, when Europe, they're playing in the dirt, like having fun being farmers and subsistence living, right?
No pyramids in England.
Once those European traders, finally started to make inroads in the Middle East, they found these concepts and brought them back to Europe, and that's positive cultural exchange. Colonialism, I would argue, is appropriation, not necessarily exchange. Some view it differently, but that's my take on it. But the area of European colonialism does lead to a lot of encounters between different cultures. As well as the exchange of goods, languages, technologies, customs, services, and the impact there was significant impact that this had on both the colonizers and the colonized. And I think you see like the positive impacts in a lot of the colonizer countries and a lot of the negative impacts in the colonized countries.
Right, and I think that this in itself is kind of the root of all evil.
Yeah,
colonization.
Yeah.
It's really somebody saying that.
It's somebody coveting something that somebody else
and
has,
taking
right?
it,
and taking it,
and
by force, usually.
By force, perhaps, and also treating the denizens of that environment as if they are less than.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing about it too, is that when these things happen, it's clearly that the dominant culture or one culture, we won't necessarily say the dominant, comes in because they envy certain things that the other culture has. They want these things that the other culture has, yet they treat these other people as savages. Right. So that's weird. Yeah. Maybe they had to do that to rationalize why it was okay to do that.
Well, I think what was the English saying, that the sun never
sets on the British Empire.
On the British Empire. They just wanted stuff. They wanted land.
They wanted everything. In the 20th century, now moving on, we have globalization. Mm-hmm. So in the modern era, we have accelerated cross-cultural exchange through social medias, transportation, communications, technology. And, it's very easy to facilitate the sharing of ideas in language and art and music, cuisine, pop culture on a global scale. And it's very interesting. You see this in the recent explosion of like Korean cultural goods being shipped out across the world, like BTS, the boy band, or
which are now defunct.
Squid Game, these Korean K-dramas. Like you're seeing all this stuff come out from Korea, or like Hyundais and Kias, which are being stolen at an alarming rate, from what I understand. But yeah, there's tons of stuff that comes out from like travel and tourism. Study abroad, international work experience, and international school trips. These are positive cultural exchange. Cultural festivals, events, foods, social medias exchanges, international diplomacy, international academic and sporting competitions. This is cultural exchange. Work visas, student visas, residency programs, international conferences, trade shows, music events, art exhibitions, film festivals. Heck, Gordon Ramsay's show Uncharted is a form of cultural exchange. It's a guy going around exploring a region that he's not familiar with, sampling the local cuisine and trying his best to emulate that local cuisine against a local chef.
He's doing a Bobby Flay with
that's kind of a joke, but food is a huge part of culture, sharing of food, I think, is a massive cultural exchange. Right. So,
although I would also say that globalization, I think that we have been so insulated in the United States for such a long time. This is different for Europeans and other countries because their boundaries are closer and they, traded.
There's a little more cultural exchange there happening.
Whereas we're so isolated over here that, we were the end all and do all. And now we are finding it difficult to compete in some of these arenas. Yeah. Largely because of our economic structure here. Yeah. And so globalization is, I like that you're bringing out all the cultural aspects of it and all of the positives, with art and music and food and things like that and exchanges and so forth. But I don't know if every American necessarily believes that globalization has been the best thing in the world.
Sure. I'm sure if you talk to like factory workers or plant workers, we can't say factory anymore, plant workers, or auto union
auto
workers
industry, yeah.
or people who are in heavy manufacturing and industry like Bethlehem Steel,
Right.
maybe, for example.
Well, maybe not those as much, but clearly appliances.
Yeah.
A great example.
Oh, sure.
You know.
Yeah, everything's like a Samsung, right?
right,
And they're all crap.
Well, just Samsung though.
Yeah,
There's
just
a lot
Samsung.
Of
Just
other,
Samsung.
lot of other that are great.
Don't get a Samsung.
Right. Okay.
So,
They're
yeah.
not one of our sponsors, so just
So, I don't know. I think kind of wrapping up with
Right.
our thoughts because
Right.
we've gone on for a while
Right.
now. I feel like culture just evolves over time. There's no dominant culture that has ever lasted forever. You can look over time. Every culture falls. Every country falls at some point. So regardless of what people believe about nations that currently exist, these nations are going to change over time. Some will cease to exist entirely in like 50 years. Some countries don't exist right now that will exist in 50 years from now. So some will go from underdeveloped to like the most technologically developed around. Like if you look in the year 1980, Dubai was a flat piece of desert in the middle of nowhere, and now it's like this crazy built-up hyper city. Right. So this is shown to be true time and time again, and it's going to continue to be true in the future. It's not going to change. The only constant is that it will change, I guess you could say.
Right.
So what does that mean for cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation, and cultural exchange? It's going to happen. There's no way you can stop it from happening. It's probably an unstoppable thing beyond anybody's control. If Miley Cyrus, for example, didn't twerk at the 2013 VMAs, some other white girl's going to do it a year later. It's going to happen. So, that's not to say that it's acceptable or okay by any standards, but as a group of people, as a society, we have to learn how to be okay with it happening and how to move with it. Essentially, how to go forward in a way that works effectively and reasonably for most people.
Right.
So I think one of those things is like not necessarily listening so much to these very small groups of people that have very, very loud voices yelling about something that maybe doesn't matter that much. I think one of the larger issues, if we look at cultural appropriation, is what happens when it comes from people in places of power, people who have status, who can, like we say, wear the hat for a day and then just go back to being who they were the day before with no negative effects on them. When these people appropriate from people who have no power, no status, and no ability to affect change in their own lives, then these people, kind of take all these positively viewed aspects from the culture, but don't have to take on the negatively viewed aspects at the same time. And that's what makes the people who are part of that culture upset.
Right.
Because you're not dealing with their struggles. You're not actually interacting with what it's like to be that culture in a real sense.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So.
And I'm sort of thinking that at this point, and I'm not talking about worldwide, but necessarily in the United States where we have a lot of appropriation issues. I feel like we're in a cultural amalgamation.
I definitely think so.
I feel like none of us are, I wouldn't go to another country and say, even though my ancestry is Italian, I wouldn't go there and say I'm an Italian. I go there and say I'm an American.
Yeah, of course.
And every American is like a mutt, almost.
Yeah.
Except for, of course there are people who are from somewhere else.
Yeah, right.
And they're not. But I think that we have to take the baseline is that we have to ensure that we are not taking culturally from somebody who is struggling.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That we have to have an even playing field.
Yeah.
And that we have to assimilate each other's cultures in a good way.
In a healthy way.
In a healthy way.
Yeah. I think I can definitely understand the sentiment where it feels horrible to feel like something has been stolen from you.
Right.
Especially when it's something like as core as what you view as your identity.
Right.
What makes you you. So, and when it's taken by a group of people who already wield immense power, whether it's politically, economically, socially over you, then that feels especially negative, because those people get to take your core identity, they get to look cool while doing it, and then they get to profit from it, and you get
Right.
nothing out of that.
Right.
So I get that that's really that's a
That's the
serious
core of it.
problem, because black people in the US have to deal with the very real issue of racism in a way that white people don't.
Let me shed some light on that.
Yeah.
So, okay, I did an exercise with a group, I don't know, several years ago, and I handed everybody a 3x5 card, and I said,
Yeah.
everybody in the room, give me 3 things that identify you.
Yeah.
And every white person in the room had I'm intelligent, I'm athletic, I'm this or that.
Yeah.
Every person of color in the room led with,
I'm black,
I'm
or
black.
I'm Indian,
Asian.
or Asian. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's why it's so far out of our purview to even understand in
Yeah.
some regards.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think part of it does come from us being American, where I honestly struggle myself to feel like I have a cultural identity, because my family came over to this country on both sides in the late 1800s, early 1900s, early 1900s, which at most makes me like a third generation
Right.
American, or maybe a second generation American. And so culturally, I don't really identify that much with American culture. I don't know if I identify a whole lot with the cultures where I'm supposedly from, which would be Poland or Italy.
Right.
But so yeah, I feel like I don't quite have that. I don't have something where it feels as significant to me as being black.
Right.
There's nothing.
Right. Well,
I don't have that kind of qualifier.
Black people came here a different way.
Yeah.
Our ancestors came here
Like-
willingly, wantingly.
Oh,
Black-
there were some things going on in Europe at the time that maybe
there was slavery.
influenced their
Right,
choice
but-
to come over here,
okay.
but they did choose to
They
come
were
over here,
poor.
right?
They were poor. They
Yeah,
had
yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
But they came over here of their own accord.
Yeah.
Versus people who were taken out of their homeland
Sure.
and brought here in
Right.
shackles.
By force,
That's a
by-
whole different
through
thing.
slavery.
That's a
Yeah,
whole
right.
different thing.
So
We digress.
So yeah, so
Your
in
thoughts.
kind of thinking, about this, so how do we acknowledge these very real and legitimate feelings that people have when their culture gets stolen by, these other cultures, and we also recognize that we can't stop that. And that's kind of where things get difficult,
Murky.
right? Because the shortest and easiest answer to that would be to delegitimize all people who appropriate culture. But who gets to choose that? And
Where does it begin?
and
Where does
how
it
do
end?
you, yeah, where does it begin? Where does it end? How do you, as a non-dominant or a person of the non-dominant culture, affect the dominant culture? Can you? So it has to come from internally, probably, whereas white people would have to police themselves about what cultures they're appropriating,
Right.
or vice versa. Any other culture would have
Right.
to police themselves. So there's basically just too many unanswered and untested questions that we can't really discuss right now, and a lot of it seems unreasonable and ineffective and full of potential pitfalls. So I think the easiest way to do something that we can actually do is probably ignore, maybe not completely ignore, but try to not worry so much about what we view as instances of cultural appropriation right now. And if we want to work to eliminate such things from society, we need to equalize the level of power between all groups of people.
Hear, hear.
So that it becomes less of a dominant group stealing from a non-dominant group, and it becomes more of a cultural exchange that is freely given
Right.
if they want to. And if these two cultures or multiple cultures who are relatively equally powerful kind of come into contact, nobody can really steal anything from anybody, because they'll be able to police each other, or they'll be able to
Or be able to have a free
kind
exchange.
of have a free exchange, or just kind of ignore that cultural appropriation won't make them feel bad, because it doesn't matter,
Right.
because this person's not in power above me.
Right.
You know?
Right. They have no authority
So
over you.
That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Okay. So is that where we're at for today?
Yeah, I think that about does it for us here today.
I think you have to tune in, folks, next month when we take on the Olympics.
Right. We are going to be doing a little bit more of a softball topic. We're going to be talking about the Olympics because it is happening this year and it is pretty relevant. And there's some stuff that's been happening that I think that you have some concerns about. I also have some concerns about.
So we want to talk to you about.
So we want to talk about. But, we want to say thanks again for joining us and taking the time out of your busy day to enjoy our conversation. Please remember to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out. And you can now find us on basically every streaming platform. We are on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we are on Audible, we are on Samsung Podcasts, if you use that for whatever reason, and a bunch of other platforms. I'll make sure to do some posts and make sure everybody can find those very easily. And so whenever you want to listen to us, we're there on your favorite platform. And we'll be back next week, or next month with our episode on the Olympics. And until then, remember, everybody, mind the generation gap and keep it civil. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.